Hi, my name is Larkin, and today we're going over the ladder stitch. So the ladder stitch is known by a couple different names. It's called the ladder stitch, an invisible stitch, or a slip stitch. Basically, the idea behind it is that it's the most invisible hand stitch. It can be used to create seams, repair seams, finish pillows, or even sometimes sew corners where you don't want the stitching to show. The same technique can be used on pretty much anything that can be sewn. There are slight differences between using this stitch on leather versus fabric, but most of it is the same, so let me show you how that works. So we're gonna start underneath and knot off, and then we're going to go under the fabric, straight across, using a perpendicular movement into the other side of the fabric, underneath the fabric again, and then straight across, and then underneath the fabric again. You can see why they called it the ladder stitch. You want them evenly spaced, and it's really important to keep these stitches straight, perpendicular to the seam, so that there's no puckering or pulling when the thread is pulled tight and the two sides of the seam come together. So when you are creating a seam, it's really easy to hide your knots, both starting and stopping, and you don't really have to worry about any other threads. When you're doing a repair, however, there are often trailing threads that have come unraveled, so you need to make sure that you are taking care of those so that it doesn't continue to come undone. So I'm going to go over just a couple of the tools that we use. The first is a curved needle, sometimes called an upholstery needle. This one is like a mattress needle, but they come in all different sizes and shapes. For this project, we're probably going to use one like this. It's probably the most common. We also have these that are just slightly bent. This is called a J needle. And then we have just regular straight needles as well. So you'll want to use an upholstery thread for upholstery projects. Otherwise it won't hold up to the wear and tear and it will break. Upholstery thread is generally made of polyester or nylon and is a lot heavier weight than your normal sewing thread. The last thing you'll need is a pair of scissors. I do recommend ones that are sharp all the way to the tip, because sometimes to snip those threads, we've got to use the very tip. So when we're working with leather versus fabric, we're going to use a couple of additional tools. Sometimes we'll use needle nose pliers to help push these needles in and out. The other would be rubber grippers that will help you pull the needle through. And then the third way that we would get it through is by pushing using some type of thimble. This one is a hand thimble, but you can push the needle through. In the case of a repair, you want to make sure that you're going in and out of the pre-existing holes, because otherwise you would weaken the integrity of the piece of leather you're working with. But for the most part, it's all going to be the same, so let's get into it. Okay, here we are in the back of the shop. You can see all of the things happening around us. And right here, I'm going to show you the same type of repair on a real piece of furniture. You can see we have our trailing threads, we have our split seam. I've got my curved needle. I've got my thread in a similar color. I'm going to show you a trick for threading your needle, especially when you're going through these heavier weight fabrics and you have to pull a little bit harder. This is for when you're stitching on a single piece of thread. We're going to lock the needle. So I've got the needle just threaded through I've got the thread just threaded through the eye of the needle, and then I'm going to turn my needle around after I've come down a couple inches. I'm going to poke the needle through the thread. So I've split the thread there on the needle, and I'm going to pull that to the bottom gently until it's all the way through. Now I've got it locked on there. It's not going to come off. So when I'm pulling it through, I'm not going to lose my needle, but it's not so thick that it won't fit through the fabric. I am going to go ahead and tie that knot at the end. This is how I tie them. I roll it around my finger and then just roll it off. That's going to give you a nice chunky knot that is not going to pull through the fabric. So you can see I've got that right there. Now I'm going to start from the inside when it's at the beginning, and we can get inside this big old rip here. I can just kind of reach inside. And I always say, like, the hardest part is getting it started, figuring out where you want to be. But you do want to go back into where the seam is still intact. I can get a little bit closer to that seam there. There we go. And now we're going to start with that ladder stitch going into the fabric, back out with that curved needle, and then straight across into the other side of the fabric, in and out. You can see I'm following along with the threads that were in the original seam. That's going to help me with the spacing, matching that. And when I get to the trailing end, I'll be able to be right next to it so I can tie it off in a knot and stop that seam from unraveling anymore. As I go every few stitches, I'm just going to pull it tight so those stitches disappear. And again, when I'm closer to the beginning and I have a little bit of opening, I can get my finger inside and around to the back to help keep me on track. Right here you can see the line of the fold. There's a little bit of a difference in color. That's where the previous stitches were, so that's what I'm going to follow along with. If there isn't a fold that's readily obvious or a difference in color like this, you can always draw a line to keep you going straight. So this is the thread that I've been stitching with, and this is half a thread or a little bit of the thread from the original seam. What I'm going to do right here is I'm going to tie them in a knot so that this cannot continue unraveling. I'm still going to keep stitching just a little ways, but right here I'm going to go ahead and tie a square knot with this little bit of leftover thread. Once that is tied, I can trim off the extra. Now I'm going to go back down into that seam so it disappears. All I'm doing here is flipping the knot to the underside. And I'm probably going to stitch about at least an inch past where that seam started to come apart, so that I know that I've got it really locked in and it's not going to come apart again. You're giving me wind and rain. You're some kind of butterfly. Baby, you give me midnight. Okay, so I've gone about an inch past that spot. I'm going to do one more time, smooth it out with my fingers, make sure it's not puckered. And then I'm going to go ahead and stitch down into that old seam line, find one of those stitches to wrap around, again making sure that those stitches are locked in and it won't unravel later. So I'm going to wrap under, then pull my thread up. I'm just using this hand to help it not tangle. Pull it through until I have a little loop left. Then I'm going to bring my needle back through that loop. And again, I'm holding on to it so it doesn't tangle. And we're gonna pull that tight. We're gonna go one more time. And this time I'm gonna take a tiny bite of the fabric, just a few threads, to further secure it. Pull my needle through, using my other hand to help prevent tangling. Have this little loop left. Bring my needle back through the loop, pull it through, pull it down in, last thing, we're gonna hide this tail. I'm gonna stitch into that seam line and pull my needle out a little ways. Pull that out. If I pull it just tight enough, it's gonna help that knot disappear into the seam. And then I can go ahead and clip my thread right next to the fabric and it disappears. So that's about it for the ladder stitch. Let us know if you have any questions about this stitch or other hand stitch repairs. Stay tuned, next time we're gonna show you how to do a decorative top stitch. Thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one.